back. It is Bone.
Oh, yeah.
And in this one, let's go ahead and do a top 10 video. Now, I do these every once in a while to do some top 10 countdowns of figures from Mcfarlane's DC Multiverse. Now, this time we're going to take a look at something that was inspired by when I used to collect DC Universe classics, and they used to put a sticker on some of the figures that had never been made before. And the stickers would say, first time in 6 inch, which meant that that character had never been produced in the 6 inch range. Now, it would have been cool if Mcfarlane could do the same thing, but it would have been a lot of stickers because, in all honesty, Mcfarlane has made tons of figures that we never thought of, that we never imagined, that had never even been contemplated to be done in action figure form, not only in 7 inch, but this list is going to be more about just characters in general that had never been done before in plastic form. Now, at first, I thought this list would be easy to come up with, but then I started to notice that Mcfarlane has done a lot of figures that arguably have been done before and even sometimes maybe better than they were done by Mcfarlane. Now, this doesn't mean that he did do some that were, leaps and bounds better than the ones done previously by other companies, but I wanted to concentrate this list more on characters, versions of characters that we've never seen. Now, number one on my list is going to be Duke Thomas, The Signal. Now, this is the comic book version. Mcfarlane also turned around and did a Dark Knight's Metal version of Duke Thomas, which is, completely different than this comic styled version. Now, very rare for people to even know about this character or, want this character in their line. So I thought it was very interesting that Mcfarlane made a figure, all original sculpt, very accurate to the comics, and brought us a version of Duke Thomas that we never would have seen from another toy company. Now, he did come with his two weapons, and although this is a very underrated figure, he has some great articulation, even having a very nice forward ab crunch. One thing I wasn't happy about was he didn't have any storage for the weapons. Now, this is my custom version. I did end up buying 3 of these, so I went ahead and customized this one, thinking as well that one day I would add some wash maybe, but we could do that later on. But one thing I did want to do was add a storage for his 2 weapons, which I thought was missing from the original release. Now, this was a battle between him and Ghostmaker. Ghostmaker, another character that could have been on the list, never seen before in action figure form. But I thought with the limited articulation that Ghostmaker had, and also his relative obscurity, which, a lot of people really don't know who Ghostmaker is, so it wouldn't be a big seller. Although he ended up doing fairly well, Duke Thomas, the Signal from the comics, was a very awesome figure that Mcfarlane made for the first time in plastic form. Now, coming in at number 9 on my list, we do have Ambush Bug. Now, this is another obscure out there character, one of the original breakers of the fourth wall. Really unbelievable that we finally got this figure. Now, this is another one that I ended up buying 3 of. So if I ever decide to do some kind of custom, a lot of times he would be dressed in human clothing, like a Hawaiian shirt, or dressed up as a soldier. So I may end up doing a custom of him in the future. But one of the best things about this release was that he came with Cheeks, his little doll sidekick from the comics. Once again, a character that I never thought we would get to actually have physically in our hands. Now, this is a pretty good release. Wasn't great. It did have one alternate hand. If you look at the thumbs up here, this is a custom alternate hand that I did. But one of the best things about this figure was that it was the first time that Mcfarlane made this body, the John Kent body, without any sculpting in the lower leg. So it was a nice, clean, plain lower leg that he could have used in future releases. But that is my number 9, Ambush Bug. Now, coming in at number 8, we do have Punchline. Now, this is another one that was never made into a figure before, Mcfarlane being the first one to make Punchline into a actual figure that we could have in our displays. Not the best figure that Mcfarlane has done, although she does have all of the details and everything that people recognize from Punchline. Once again, the minimal alternate hands. The head sculpt was a little bit iffy. I did have to warm mine up and modify it to make her a little bit more to my liking. But you do see the difference here when Mcfarlane has to make an action figure. He has to pretty much stay with adding as much articulation as he can, which is the whole point of the more than 20 points of articulation. So sometimes the figures are affected negatively by this. I mean, that's something that people don't understand. And all you have to do for proof is look at the statue version that Mcfarlane made. I mean, this is what you would like to see in your figure. But for Mcfarlane to recreate the statue in action figure form, you would have to start making cuts to allow the articulation. And that is where it sometimes gets lost in the translation. So I know people would like a lot of the figures to look like statues, but once you start adding articulation, it's sometimes very difficult to execute the character, but still a great addition to our collections. And once again, first time ever in plastic form. That is Punchline, my number 8. Coming in at number 7, we do have Ragman. Now, this one made the list for a couple of reasons. First off, because this was a rumored figure to be done by Mattel in the DC Universe Classics line. Now, it never came out because I think I heard that it was a lot to do with the sculpt. There was just going to be no way that they could make the body type with all the added patches of rags on the character and do it under budget. Now, Mcfarlane did kind of sidestep here because although he gave him a very nice torn up cloak, wired for posability, one thing he messed up in is he did not sculpt in any of the patches. Now, the second thing I wasn't happy about was that he made the legs using the John Kent body book, and once again, this one had the original sculpted work from John Kent. Now, I don't know if he didn't have the ambush bug legs, which, of course, as we talked about, were cleanly sculpted. But, I mean, although it doesn't really detract that much, we still finally got a Ragman to add to our collection. It is a negative for the figure. But once again, really happy to have some form of Ragman that we could have in our displays and add to our collections a very obscure character that a lot of people don't know about, allowing him to grow in the collector community. That is number 7, Ragman. Now, coming in at number 6, we have the Flash from the Page Punchers wave. Now, this is very interesting because I have to say, look at all the original sculpt. Look at the execution of this figure, the way they did the wrist joints, the way they did the ankle joints. I really wish Mcfarlane would have followed this same format throughout his whole DC line. Now, we do know that Page Punchers are usually made using original sculpt. I mean, you have the rare outlayer that is just a reuse from another figure, but for the most part, Page Punchers has always been original sculpt, which is very optimistic. If Mcfarlane gets to continue making figures under the DC Direct banner, hopefully it would just be part of the Page Punchers. And this brings in what I was talking about before about there are hundreds of characters, figures that McFarlane made for the very first time. Page punchers tended to bring out a lot of designs and sculpt and figures that we've never seen before. So you could kind of say that besides this Flash, which was really well done, a lot of the page punchers range was new sculpt, was original sculpt, was new characters that we've never seen before. But this is definitely one of my favorite designs. That is number 6, the Flash from Page Punchers. Coming in at number 5, we do have Speedy Bullets. Now, this was something that was in the recesses of my mind from reading comics when I was younger. And when McFarlane released this figure, it really brought back those old memories. And I have to say, this was one of the first times that McFarlane made a very aesthetic, very symmetrical looking Batman figure. Now, he did go on to reuse this body bug several times, but this is the original. Great release with the alternate hands and the great articulation. Now, one negative I do have to say is that McFarlane did pair this figure up. They were released at the same time with Batrocidus, which is a rare evil form of Batman from the Dark Knight's metal. Now, aside from this being another form of Batman and not really everybody's favorite, I thought this was a really missed opportunity for McFarlane to release the Superman from Speeding Bullets, which has his own look and design. It would have really been awesome for him to release the Speeding Bullets Batman and also the Speeding Bullets Superman right alongside each other. But for what it is, once again, great to have Speeding Bullets for the first time in action figure form. So that is number 5, Speeding Bullets. Now coming in at number 4 is a pretty divisive release from McFarlane, and that was Captain Carrot. Now the reason being because although a great release, just look at the original sculpt, look at all the detail, look at the textures, the execution was just flawless. But you had a lot of people at the same time that were not happy with the character choice and saying, who asked for this? Who wants a super bunny in their collection? Now, you did have a lot of comic collectors saying that this was great, this was awesome. In fact, one of the better figures that McFarlane released throughout his run. Definitely reaching to those higher heights of obscure characters. A phenomenally executed figure. And McFarlane would go on to release 2 other versions of this character, really allowing him to get the most out of the originally sculpted molds. So that's our number 4, Captain Carrot. Now we get into the top 3. Coming in at number 3, we have one of my favorite figures released by McFarlane. Although not the best, we have Icon from Milestone Comics. Now, the reason this is one of my favorites is because I waited years to have some kind of action figure of Icon. Now, I did make my own custom version of this character when I was collecting DC Universe Classics, but I always wanted an updated version. Now, the reason for me this is great, aside from the great head sculpt, the cloth wire cape, is because if we never get another Icon figure, this is an awesome base to have to make a custom Icon. Adding your own sculpted details, changing up the paint, I'll be able to make, especially with how far I've advanced in customizing, I will be able to make a very awesome looking old school milestone version of Icon. Customizing has become a big thing that I do. I mean, I've been working on tons of customized figures like this Superman, and it really takes up a lot of time, but it is one of the biggest factors that made McFarlane's DC Multiverse, so enjoyable to me. Really an awesome aspect of the range. Hopefully, before it ends, we can get a couple of more characters from Milestone. But if we don't, it is great to have this awesome icon figure, first time ever in plastic form. Coming in the runner up for the best McFarlane figure done for the very first time. And that is going to be Cyborg Superman from the new 52. Now, this was my figure of the year last year, and it is obvious why. The attention to detail, the sculpt, the extreme articulation, you can really get this guy in some awesome poses. This is what I really expected from McFarlane. As much as people hated all the textures and new designs, and they would whine and pout about wanting classic looks, I have a completely different outlook. I have an open mind. I love to see stuff that I've never seen before. And I have a little bit darker of an edge to me. So I like skulls and madness and just, darker things that some people would not really like, that are just not everybody's cup of tea. But this was an awesome release by McFarlane. Beautiful figure, great to display, never before seen in action figure form. And that is my number two, the runner up, Cyborg Superman from the new 52. Now, I am going to do an honorable mention, and not only is it the two figures I will show you, it is all the figures that McFarlane has made that we never would have even thought of or imagined to be released. You're going to get into all of the Last Night on Earth, Curse of the White Knight figures, everything that was a more modern take on the DC Comics mythos. Now, while a lot of people could hate all of that and say that it's crap, that nobody wants that, as I said, you're always going to have two sides. And although I do enjoy classics, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy original forms of characters, versions of characters. I also like to be blown away and see things that I've never seen before. So the honorable mentions are going to be Hellbat, the Batman in the Hellbat armor, which it was so early in the line, and that was something that I expected from McFarlane. Those big chunky figures, the new designs, as well as alongside of this one, the Superman Unchained. I mean, people really became closed minded, and anything negative that were said about these figures just really were pushing that idea that we don't want to see new looks, where in fact we should want new looks at the same time enjoying old classic versions. But these were just, to me, the quintessential releases from McFarlane that were an idea of things to come. So those are my honorable mentions. Not only a ton of figures in the McFarlane line, but your Hellbat Armor Batman and your Superman Unchained. Now, I can't say it enough. There were tons of figures that I could have gone with to pick characters or versions of DC characters that we've never seen before. But my number one is and will always be Grim Knight. Just a character that I'm really drawn to. Love the idea of having a Batman that has no limits, pretty much fulfilling his no nonsense vigilante legacy. Now, although they did do Grim Knight dirty in the comics, that will never take away that I love the design, I love the look of the character, and this is a great example of what I'm talking about. You can basically take all of the Dark Knight metal figures and say that this was the first time we had them in action figure form. I mean, you have stuff like the Red Death, which is another one of my favorites, as well as the whole first line of Dark Knight's metal. I mean, another, underrated figure I think is Dawnbreaker. Great original sculpt, great paint, and the majority of collectors were just not into it. And that is fine. We don't all have to agree. Everybody has their own preferences. But I love me some Grim Knight so much that I own 11 of these figures, as well as I did purchase the Mcfarlane statue, which I still want to take a look at. Even going into things like the Batmo Beast, which was another thing that we never would have seen before, and maybe we'll never see the likes of ever. And there was tons of characters. I went through the Fusion Batman and Superman figure, Clock King. I mean, you could just go on and on with all of the figures that McFarlane has made over these years. First time ever in action figure form. So anyways, guys, that is my list. Let me know your favorites down below. But as always, keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.